Risch, so thank you for coming out and joining us today. My name is Ashley Begg. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for Rev1 Ventures, and welcome to Founder's Story. If you're new to Rev1, we are a startup studio who helps startups scale and corporates innovate. You are at our Innovation Center today. I'm going to go ahead and let these ladies kick us off soon, but just to let you know how today will go, we're going to start off with some introductions and a planned Q&A, and then we will open it up for audience participation. We have mics ready, so when it is time for audience Q&A, please hold your hand up. We will call you out. We will bring a mic to you to start the questions. To kick us off, I will hand it over to our Managing Director of Venture Development, Sara Risch.
Hi, everybody. You can hear me, right? It's working good. Awesome. Hey, so Sara Risch, excited to be talking today with Dr. Kristy Townsend. She has a PhD in Neuroscience and is also the co-founder of Neuright. So, Kristy, do you mind introducing yourself to the
First test. Hi, everyone. So I'm currently a professor at Ohio State University. And then on the side, nights and weekends right now, we have our startup company Neuright that's incubating here. I should have known this was happening. I was coughing. So it's probably an unusual situation you've heard about for a company starting because I'm a scientist for my day job and I run a research lab. And we're interested in how the brain and the nervous system control our metabolic health. So how our brain regulates how hungry we are. So we wake up in the morning, what hormones are making you hungry to come in here to Rev1 and have breakfast. And also how our nervous system controls how we burn calories. So preventing things like obesity and diabetes. And then we're interested in how the nervous system changes as we age and causes more metabolic disease as we age. So that's our basic research. Should I go into how that led to the company yet, or is that another question?
Well, so that was actually my first question. Okay. Maybe so an explanation of the company. So Neuright, what's your elevator pitch on what Neuright is and really what is Neuright's mission?
Yeah, so Neuright, our tagline is to make neuropathy right. So it's actually kind of a nerdy portmanteau, I guess, between Neuright, ITE, which is what we call the extensions of our nerve cells. So a nerve cell has a cell body and these long axons and dendrites that come out of it, and those are called neurites. So we just sort of changed the spelling of it because we care about a disease state called peripheral neuropathy. How many people have heard of peripheral neuropathy, actually? Okay, so usually people know somebody who has it. It's quite a common condition. So it's when your peripheral nerves that are innervating all your tissues and organs start to die back. So diabetes is the #1 cause. So if you've heard of people getting a limb amputation with diabetes, that's caused by their peripheral neuropathy. It can also happen when people are on chemotherapy treatments. They start to get numbness and tingling in their legs, and that's the nerves dying as a side effect of the chemotherapy. And it's also common with aging and about 30 other conditions. So there are some environmental factors, some antibiotics. And the interesting thing about peripheral neuropathy is there's no treatment right now. And with diabetes, even though there's no treatment directly to regrow the nerves as they die, if you catch the neuropathy early, you can change how you're managing the diabetes, and that influences the progression of the neuropathy and could improve it. But aging and diabetes are a type of neuropathy called small fiber. So these are the very small nerve endings that are getting into our tissues, like our skin and our muscle. And measuring and diagnosing accurately that type of neuropathy is very difficult. So when your large nerves, like you might have heard of your sciatic nerve in the back of your leg, that's a large nerve. When you have neuropathy in those nerves, there's very good functional tests that are accurate and very good at diagnosing. But when you've got diabetic neuropathy, it's really, really tough. So we were interested in the lab at first. How can we answer your second question without even saying this? Sorry. So in the lab, we were interested in measuring this in our preclinical models. So we're interested in the disease mechanisms. So how does this happen? Why in diabetes do the nerves die? And then why do they not grow back? Because if you have a nerve injury, your nerves can usually grow back. At least outside the brain they can. And so why is this happening? We were really interested in that. So in our preclinical models using rodents, we didn't have a good way to measure the function of these nerves. Were they getting worse? Were they getting better? We could look at them histologically. We could sort of see like a tissue stain of how many nerves were in the tissue, but we couldn't measure the nerve electrical activity. So that's what led us to the product that now our company is working to commercialize. We partnered with some biomedical engineers at my prior institution, University of Maine, and we developed a microneedle array that can go into the skin and measure the activity of the nerves. But we knew that there were no current treatments for this condition, so we wanted the device to be able to also deliver future treatments that we were working on, and also be able to sample tissue fluid to discover new biomarkers, because a biomarker would be an even better and faster way to diagnose this condition quickly. So really this is a theragnostic device, so it's a diagnostic and a therapeutic together. And our MVP product, so the first thing that we're really working on moving to human and commercializing is the diagnostic portion only. And we started working on that in our preclinical rodent models, and now we've redesigned it, and now it's ready to move into human, and we now have some early measurements in healthy humans showing that we can measure their nerve electrical activity through their skin. So that was a lot. I'll stop.
No, that's great. Yeah, so really based on a deep foundation of science that you're now transitioning into a company. So going from being a scientist to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that transition?
Yeah, I have to say a lot of us who are professors or scientists in academia working at universities all day doing science with our students, we don't often think about the applicability of what we're doing. We sort of sometimes create knowledge for knowledge's sake and then hope that the outside world sees it when we publish and present, and then they will apply it. But I think more and more people like me are learning that we can take what we're using in the lab that's useful for us in the lab, and if there's a societal need, and in our case we think there is, then we can either license that technology or form a spin out like we did, and hope that we can get it out there and make it a product that will benefit patients and their quality of life. So yeah, it is a different way of thinking. We had to essentially be told this is something patients need. We weren't thinking about that when we were using it in our mouse models of diabetes. And so that's what got us there. And now we love it. Now we're looking at that everywhere. And everything we do now, we're thinking, how can this be applied? Is this relevant for human health? Is this something that could be, commercialized and get out there into the clinic? So now we've got those goggles on for everything we do. And we tell our colleagues to try and think that way as well.
That's awesome, and we appreciate that. So your co-inventor is also your co-founder. Can you tell us more about the team that you have together for in your lab as well as at the company?
Yeah, so the team's much bigger. So my co-founder is Magda Blaskevich, so Dr. Blaskevich. She's a postdoc in my lab, and we've been working together for many years. But we also have a third co-inventor, Rosemary Smith, who's a biomedical engineer at University of Maine, but she didn't do the company with us. She knew better, so she left that to us. But then we have a much broader team beyond that. So we've been collaborating with a lot of academics, computer and electrical engineers. We have a scientific advisory board with really thought leaders in the neuropathy space, so MD neurologists and things like that. So really the team has been the key part. We love the people we're working with. We always choose carefully when we form collaborations to make sure that they're people we actually want to work with and not just people who really know their stuff. So Magda and I formed the company in 2018, and have just been nights and weekends working on it, writing grants, trying to keep things in the early phases grant funded before we need to get into clinical trials and have more VC funding. So we've been having fun learning and using a different part of our brain than the research part of our brain. So yeah.
Awesome. So the company was founded in Maine when you were working at the University of Maine, where the technology was invented, and then you moved to Columbus.
Yeah.
So can you talk about maybe the resources that you've seen in Columbus and really what that transition looks like and how we can support startups here?
Yeah. So getting our start in Maine was fantastic. We still have a footprint in Maine, and Maine is beneficial to us as we grow. I think because they have the oldest population in the country. I don't know if people knew that. I always thought it was Florida, but Maine is where the oldest average age population is. So we know that that's another target market for us when we get into clinical trials. So we've maintained a presence in Maine, but we were excited to relocate here for some of the obvious reasons. I mean, it's just a bigger city, a bigger state economy. There's more resources here in general for startups. But Ohio State is really where we wanted to partner as we move into human, because they're really set up to do translational and clinical research studies. The doctors there are used to having these research arrangements and collaborating with whether it's a startup or another faculty who has a product. So that was really key. And then we found Rev1, which has been fantastic. So, we're continuing to write another big grant to get us through these early first-in-human studies, and the resources we've had through Rev1 to be able to get what we need in terms of market research or go-to-sales strategy, and all of those things have just been fantastic. So we're thrilled to be here in Columbus and be here in Ohio and partnering with Ohio State clinicians.
Awesome. And so grants, those are on the radar. What else is on the radar? What else is coming up for Neuright?
So really, first-in-human testing is the next step. So we've validated that our device works in healthy humans, and now we want to say, like we did in the mouse models, can we see a difference between a healthy peripheral nerve and someone who has diabetic neuropathy? So we're partnering with neurologists at Ohio State to recruit the right patient population, and 4 labs on campus that can manufacture things is manufacturing our human device, which is more flexible than the one we use in a mouse, so it can fit around the leg. And so everything's sort of teed up and ready to go. And the next step is to do this small first-in-human study and validate that the device is working well in a disease state and not just in a healthy human. So we're excited to get that going.
Awesome. So I actually made closely on my question list, so I'm going to go Oscar. I'm confident that Kristy knows all the things that I'm going to ask. So in thinking especially about a diagnostic, a couple things come to mind. One, that it needs to be clinically actionable, and it needs to fit into the current workflow. So can you talk about how you explored that when you were designing your device?
Yeah, so we've done a ton of customer discovery interviews, as I'm sure a lot of startups have. So we've done a couple different versions of iCore, which is a program where we do a lot of customer discovery interviews. We also set up our own patient survey, so we've talked to over 100 patients who we essentially contacted through neuropathy Facebook groups primarily. And so in both talking to the patients and talking to clinicians and talking to other researchers who work in this space, we tried to make a device that was easy to use, so you didn't need a specialist, you didn't need a specialty facility, you didn't need specialized training for the personnel implementing it. We also wanted it to be inexpensive to manufacture so that our arrays that go in the skin can just be thrown away after use and not have to be re-sterilized. And right now the electronics that read out the electrical signature from the device are commercial, so that's easy as well. So those can just be plugged into our device and set up in a clinic. So those are the kind of things we were hearing from people. So as we redeveloped our mouse prototype into human, we were thinking about all those considerations and what was needed. And our goal ultimately as a company is to make this something like a blood pressure cuff or a glucose monitor, something you could go pick up at Walgreens and bring home and test on your own, or go test in a minute clinic or something like that, so that you'd be aware of the health of your own peripheral nerves, because it is tough to know. I mean, there's so many risk factors and so many diseases that cause it. None of us are always fully aware. We have odd symptoms and not really know that maybe there's something causing death of our peripheral nerves.
Nice. And then, so one of the other aspects of bringing a medical product to market is thinking about the healthcare economics. And so how did you start to ask those initial questions to see if this economically could be commercially viable?
Yeah, that's a good question. That might be something we're still figuring out as we go, because as anyone knows who works in the medical space, it can be tough to talk to insurance companies and figure out what they think about things. It can be tough to talk to possible buyers who purchase these products. So I think that's still a little bit of a black box for us, but we do know that if we're improving time to diagnosis, some of the patients we talked to took up to 10 years, moving around to different specialists, and then finally at the end getting to a neurologist, and we found out that is our beachhead because the majority of people end up diagnosed by a neurologist. It can take people time to be taken seriously. These are vague symptoms sometimes. I feel tingling in my toes. So who's your doctor sending you to? So speeding time to diagnosis saves everybody time and money. And having a clear, accurate accurate quantitative diagnosis also helps because there are treatments coming, even though right now today it's just pain mitigation. There are lots of new treatments coming through the R&D pipeline, and as those become available, there probably is a critical window, a critical therapeutic window early in disease progression when you want to implement those treatments. So if the diagnosis is slow or unclear or you just never get one, then the time frame when you want to, start treating the patient with these new treatments could be gone, and then there'd be a point of no return, because eventually the nerves won't regrow if they've gone too long. And it is a progressive degenerative disease similar to Alzheimer's.
And so, speaking of therapies in development, this could have a play there in helping to understand how well these therapies that are in the clinic but in clinical trials are working. Can you speak a bit more to that?
So we think of our device having sort of three uses. So one is screening, so similar to a blood pressure cuff or a glucometer, just screening for nerve health. The second one would be diagnosis. So if you have diabetes or aging, chemotherapy treatments or other risk factors, it could diagnose that you have small fiber neuropathy. And it can monitor nerve regrowth. So as nerves are dying, when you get a treatment, the electrical signature should recover. And so the device should be able to monitor recovery after treatments as well. So really, we think of it as having three distinct uses just on the diagnostic platform side.
Awesome. So yeah, lots of really great science based in an understanding of how medicine works. I know you're also really passionate about women in science and medicine. Can you speak a bit more about the work you're doing at Ohio State to encourage and stimulate that?
Yeah, so I'll go back even further and say that this device was invented by 3 women, so 3 women inventors. Our company is founded and owned by 2 women, so a woman-owned startup. And so this is rare, not as much, I guess, in biomedical, but just in general in the patenting and startup space. There are much fewer women doing this work. So I was already involved actively at my prior university and now at my current university in supporting women in STEM fields. I started our Women in STEM group at University of Maine, and now I'm the director of Women in Medicine and Science at Ohio State, which is part of the larger American Association of Medical Colleges group. And so I already was doing, work in that space, sort of advocacy and professional development support to help more women faculty be promoted and retained and successful in their careers. And so through our group at Ohio State, we started a research accelerator for women faculty, and one of those tracks is partnered with Rev1 and others on campus and in the community to support women who have intellectual property ideas or want to commercialize or want to do a startup and things like that. So that's just another way we're hoping to get more women into this space.
Wonderful. And that actually comes to the end of my question list. So I think it's time to take it to the audience for any questions.
Hi, so you were speaking about just, your transition from being a researcher to becoming a business leader. That can be really challenging, really complex as well. How are you kind of thinking about continuing to upskill into that space and fill in any gaps that you and your co-founder have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are not business people. Neither of us have an MBA. Neither of us want to leave our day jobs and run a company full time. So right now we're trying to stay lean. We haven't hired anyone full time. We're grant funded. We know we can get through these early R&D phases with just us and our sweat equity on the side. But eventually we will get to the point that we can no longer do this on our own, either financially through grants or through part-time work that the founders are doing. So that is our plan to once we get through the first in human and have some good data we can bring to FDA that will have more VC investment and other bigger funding sources so that we can get through clinical trials, and at that point we'd have to bring on full-time business leads and other full-time people to really move quickly. And not every faculty wants to do what we did, by the way. We were just excited about it, and we love using this side of our brain. And I should say too that my co-founder worked in biotech for 10 years before she came to academia and got a PhD, so she had experience that was relevant. We've also done a lot of mentoring, accelerator and classes and things like that we don't have an MBA, but we've learned a lot as we go. But we're fully aware of the not knowing what we don't know aspect of this. So.
Kristy?
Kristy.
Kristy from Rev1. Well, it's actually a follow-on to Andrea's question. So given that it is a pretty significant transition from research to building a business, what has been maybe the one thing that's been the most surprising or the most challenging about just the business building aspect?
Yeah, good question. I guess getting access to data, like we're used to on the science side, you know, we have access to journals and we can get data on medical trials and research studies, but getting market research data, getting Medicare data, getting data on insurance coverage, these things are very tough to get, and so I think in some cases carry huge subscription costs, so it's, you know, that point of entry we've been surprised about, I guess, is building our knowledge base on that side. I've also been surprised, I don't think I knew, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I don't think I would have known that there were so few women in this space. I mean, we did a program in Maine called Top Gun, which is sort of like an accelerator that ends in a statewide pitch competition, and in those rooms, we were the only women sometimes. So that was surprising. So I guess those two things are the top.
Okay. Anything that has been just exceptionally rewarding that you weren't expecting?
I mean, I love it. I love this. I realize that I probably could have done this instead of becoming a researcher and a faculty member. I love it, and I think Magda does too, and I think that's why we've stayed involved and wanted to self-educate and do what we can, you know, in these early phases ourselves, because it's fun to me. I think this is exciting, that this is, and I think we should be doing more of it. I think that all these ideas, I mean, I was even at a pharma company yesterday, and they directly said, we get all our ideas from academia. They do, and so why are we not better connected to industry and to startup culture and to, you know, moving our discoveries into society? I think we should be doing way more of it in more effective ways. That's my, you put me on soapbox.
Yeah. No, well, thank you for that.
I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but you know, with a startup like this, there's a lot of regulatory type things that you have to take into consideration. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And then also as a startup, you're also trying to manage risk. You know, maybe some things that you have considered for risks of the startup. That sort of thing.
Yeah. So in terms of, you know, I'll start with the human subjects part of it. That part is where, as researchers, we do have that experience. So we put things through IRBs. We're used to compliance strategies and workflows in the university setting. But FDA, regulatory, is not usually where our brain is. So we've hired consultants to help with those things. We've talked to the FDA, not a lot yet, because we don't have a ton of human data, but we did talk to them very early. And we found them to be incredibly supportive and informative. So yeah, that is an area where, you know, let me say this carefully, medical businesses are not typical businesses. So we've all heard of eBio and Theranos and all these examples that have gone horribly wrong because you can't treat a medical product like a piece of software. You just can't. And so, you know, as academics who very much have our research ethics hats on most of the time, we're very careful and acutely aware of these things, and we want to do it the right way. We want to have reliable, transparent data. We want to peer review publish what we're doing. We want to talk to experts and get critical feedback early. We don't want to just, you know, say it works because that's what you say in a pitch and then blindly move along. So yeah, we're very aware of this. But I do personally think that I hope in my lifetime there will be more, you know, even if it's voluntary, you know, sign me up for a B Corp type, you know, stamp of approval that my biotech company is doing things the right way, and I have, you know, the right ethical standards being met, and that our data is collected in a rigorous, reproducible way. I hope I see that in my lifetime, because it is a little scary how much can happen unchecked once you leave academia.
I'd say that investors really like to see that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And on the part of the risk, were there any other risks that you saw as you're starting out? Besides things like that?
Luckily for us, I mean, our device is very low risk in terms of human safety. So these are essentially smaller versions of hypodermic needles that only go, you know, a few millimeters into the skin, and then they're sterile. So, and they're in there for less than 5 minutes and then removed. So our device is not risky in and of itself, so I think that helped. But of course, we were always thinking about making sure that the patient experience is safe and easy and relatively pain-free. So some of the earliest people who had this device in their lane were our research team. So.
Hey, I was curious to know, what would you say to other academics, especially female, who are on the fence about starting a startup with their research?
Yeah, and I think most of the women faculty I talked to don't want to do what we did. I mean, our jobs are already way more than 40 hours a week, and we want to see our families and have life outside of academia. So I think this is not for everybody, but I think if you love it, it's incredibly rewarding. And I think shepherding our product as far as we can is important to us because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. We want to be talking to the scientists and make sure that we have the right product on the science side, and talking to the clinicians and making sure we have the right product on the clinician side. And I do think we're the right people to do that. I mean, we can walk between both worlds. We're respected in our field, and I think that can't always be replicated, bringing on an external CEO early on who does all that stuff. Personally, that's what I think. But it's not for everybody, for sure. It's a ton of work, and you have to learn a whole new language in the business side of things.
So you guys mentioned a lot of the startups say they're not business people. A lot of the startups come from academia. Have you ever considered enlisting the College of Business to kind of help with some of that, especially at free to no cost?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I guess I haven't looked into it very closely at Ohio State, but at University of Maine, that was one of the first things we did, was talk to the business school and say, how are you supporting faculty spin-outs? And the answer was, we're not, and we're here for undergrads, So I don't think that's necessarily set up yet. And back to my earlier point, I think resources are there at universities and in the community, but maybe are not quite, maybe this hasn't been happening long enough in people's consciousness that these are all systems that are fully set up. But we have certainly one-off found people who have information that we want and ask for a meeting, and it's incredible how much free information people will give you. So we've done a lot of 30-minute calls when people have learned lots of things, but we haven't found specific programs that are designed to support faculty startups, but I don't have a very big sample size.
You mentioned, if I understood correctly, you have kind of a mix of software and hardware and maybe some other diagnostic elements. Can you talk a little bit about your intellectual property portfolio and your strategy going forward, of how you demarcate areas of differentiation?
Yeah, so we have a full patent that's submitted now, covering the full theragnostic platform. So that's the microneedle array itself, the ability to detect and diagnose electrical signature, the ability to sample for biomarker discovery and validation, and the ability to deliver treatments. So obviously it takes time for pets to work through the whole system, so we're still working through that. But we think we've covered with this patent everything the device can do. And then now that I'm at Ohio State, obviously new discoveries will be coming out of OSU IP. We have a biomarker that we've discovered that's now provisional has been submitted through Ohio State. And now we're working on some gene therapy options that could be delivered through this device, and that will be future OSU IP. So we are continuing to build around this device. And did I fully answer the question?
And are you filing internationally as well?
Yes, we nationalized and we're in, I can't tell you the list off the top of my head, but we did think carefully about the countries where there's either high rates of neuropathy or where devices like this we think could be employed, so yeah.
So, hey, Kristy, talk a little bit about the sort of product and market development path that you see forward with the current device and some of the new IP that you're pulling together, the extent you can talk about it.
Yeah.
Because the theranostic aspects of this, and also the device diagnostic, and then whole disease monitoring pathway is both complicated but also very interesting from a business perspective.
Yes. So I think and this is one of the things we've learned during this whole process since 2018, is that this probably is not going to be us as a small unknown startup out there selling this product. So I think partnering with a much bigger medical device company that has existing relationships with clinics would be important. But I also think our initial target would not be big university medical centers like Ohio State necessarily, because they have a lot of existing equipment and resources. I think this is a much more challenging disease to diagnose when you're out in a regular, private clinic or a family practice or more rural and not near these big academic research centers. So that's what I think so far, but that is also an area of active work on the side of the company. But I think, this process is slow for medical devices, and you have to go through a lot of human testing to get to the point that something can actually be sold. So I think there's more time to refine that. But this will be a different technique for a neurologist. What they do right now tends to be either skin biopsies that they can send out to a lab and just see how many nerve fibers are there, which is not a great diagnostic at the end of the day because it doesn't tell you whether those nerve fibers are functional. Or they do more qualitative patient self-reporting type testing. Like, can you feel this vibration on your foot? Can you feel this monofilament on your foot? So this will be a different way to test, and so I think there will have to be some clinician education and changing of their workflow a little bit. But the ones that we've talked to are excited that this is going to speed up and make more definitive their ability to diagnose. So I think there will be good adoption at the end of the day, but I think starting where people have fewer resources might be the way to go.
You brought up speed earlier. I was curious to know how quick was it to transition from animal trials to human
Yeah, good question.
Okay, can you repeat it?
So the question was, how quickly were we able to move from preclinical rodent models into human? So good question. So we actually started with this device even outside of the need for an IACUB for vertebrate testing, and we actually used cricket legs and limulus, which is horseshoe crab retina, because the electrophysiologists we were working with knew those systems, and the first thing we had to answer was, can this device pick up neuroelectrical activity? We just had to answer that question first. So that was probably the first, 6 to 8 months to manufacture the prototype and test in those models without the need for an IACUB. And then we wrote an NSF STTR phase 1, so a grant to develop and validate and optimize the device, and that got funded. Of course, funding kicked in right as COVID happened, so that did slow things down a little bit. But it probably took about 1.5 years to complete the mouse studies because we knew what we were doing. We worked with diabetic mice all the time, and we were ready to go up from that respect. And we had the other tests set up to compare to our device recordings. So that paper now is up as a preprint online, and the data are all there. And at the end, as we were finishing the mouse studies, we knew, we were already thinking, how are we going to get this into human? And the device prototype we had for mouse was very rigid. It was hard, 3D printed plastic with the needles in it. And that wouldn't mold very well to human skin. So I don't know if anybody knows, but mouse skin is very movable compared to our skin. It sort of slides around, sort of like a cat or a dog. And so we knew we had to redesign that. So as we were finishing the preclinical testing, we were already making the next prototype for human that had a flexible PC board and 3D printed out a different, more flexible material so that it could sit on the leg and mold to the leg. So now we can put it on human skin and just wrap with an ACE bandage and measure. So at the end of that, it was, healthy volunteers from our research team where we tested that, and that's in that publication. So now we're ready to go. We're submitting an SBIR phase 2 to NIH to get additional funding to do first the human testing, and then we think that should be enough, hopefully, to move into clinical trials with FDA input on this early data.
Okay.
So I have a question. I'm going to be transparent. This might be a plug for Rev1. So you've mentioned that obviously wearing all these hats is not for everyone. But for those that are interested in taking the lead, doing academia research, as well as following the entrepreneur path, what advice would you have for those individuals in leveraging the resources available? So whether, in this case, it's through OSU, the Keenan Center, Tech Transfer Office, Rev1, just like from your experience, what are the things that these individuals should be aware of, and just really not being afraid to take advantage of the resources that are out there?
So I'm going to start by saying that I'm not going to give you my fully honest answer. I'm usually a very, very honest person. But the faculty can come talk to me and get my truly, truly honest answer. But I do think that Rev1 has been fantastic, and I would definitely recommend Rev1 Rev1. I think university resources are not always, I'm talking about my prior university as well, university resources are not always giving the best advice in my experience. So I think having multiple external advisors is key for faculty and not just getting all your information within the university. And then the first part of your question, can you say the first part again about whether they want to do it or something like that?
Yeah, just people who are, currently in academia, they have an idea, they might be interested in following the entrepreneurial journey. One, taking that leap, and then two, kind of figuring out how to find the resources that are going to enable them and support them to take that leap.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess universities have been helpful, but I think both in Maine and here, it's been statewide groups. So in Maine, we had something called the Maine Technology Institute, or MTI, that had seed grants, that had support for writing SBIRs and STTRs, so similar to Rev1. And then the Top Gun program that we did, that was just for all sorts of startups, like there was like an ice cream company and, people who have like software for schools. But so being thrown in the mix with all those people, I think we learned the most. So I think, so my advice would be balance internal and external and get multiple pieces of advice, because we've gotten lots of conflicting advice, and now that we can look back, knowing what we know now, some of it was really bad advice for us. So I think that's my, okay, I ended up being incredibly more honest than I started.
I'll add on there, because I work at a couple academic institutions, and I would say the two recommendations I would have would be talk to your tech transfer office early and often. And then also, if you're looking for resources and need help, ask. A lot of times people are afraid to ask, and asking tends, like you said, it's surprising the amount of information people are willing to give you for free. So just ask.
Yeah, my favorite advice I was given as you do customer discovery is ask those people who else you should talk to. We do that now all the time. Anyone we talk to, we say, who else should we be talking to? And then we also say, what questions should we have asked you? Those two things alone, we have learned incredible amounts and been connected to people that we never would have found, through our normal networks or through Googling. So yeah, asking is key.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I commend you for what you're doing. I know several people with peripheral neuropathy. And, they're struggling. They don't have much to treat it, as you said, but also the diagnostic need is there. I was just wondering, I'm aware of a company that has a device called Scrambler. Have you heard of the Scrambler device?
No, I haven't.
They're using it to treat neuropathy. It basically, from what I understand, it basically uses the electrical impulse to fill the nerves to stop the pain, or override the nerves. Maybe not fill, but override the nerves to stop the pain and neuropathy. And so anyway, that probably answered my question. It's going to be, have you looked at teaming up with any other companies who might have interest in this field that would want to advance what you're doing? Scrambler comes to mind.
Yeah, and I'm not going to talk about Scrambler because I don't know their product specifically, but I will tell you that because the neuropathy field has such poor diagnostics and no treatments, it is fraught with pseudoscientific products. And some of them even make it in to the clinic. So there was one called Pseudoscan that was used in some clinics to detect neuropathy, and our thing that we say all the time now is Pseudoscan turned out to be pseudoscience. All the neurologists, proved that it didn't work. Proved that the claims and the data behind the claims were actually fraudulent, even though they were published. So this is something, back to the point earlier that, where are the ethics, where's the oversight in terms of the claims that these companies can make? Because patients are desperate. And what we see on these Facebook patient groups, they're sharing with each other all these like wild ideas that are not based in physiology because they're just so desperate to get an answer or to get some relief. So I think that creates this big void that we need to move in with real medical, scientifically sound solutions to replace all these bad products. So I don't know if that one is, but there are a lot like that that are not validated by clinical science.
Yeah, what I read is that it's FDA approved Scrambler.
Yeah.
My doctor did, as you said, he pulled out a nylon thread and ran it across the bottom of my foot and said, "You feel that?"
Yep, exactly.
That was his diagnosis.
Yeah, yeah.
Christy, can you make the point that just because it's FDA approved doesn't mean it actually works?
I know, I was trying to be careful saying that, but yes, yes. A lot of FDA approved things have to be pulled, right? So, yeah.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your, obviously voice of customer played a really critical role in something like what we're doing. Can you talk about how many people you talked to, and were there any epiphanies that came out of it that you didn't expect?
Yeah, so the biggest disconnect for us that we discovered in talking to, again, we talked to over 100 patients that we recruited for a survey and then follow-up interviews. And the biggest disconnect was they want an answer whether their clinicians want them to have one or not. Meaning, there are some clinicians we talked to who were very open about this. Why diagnose if we don't have a treatment? Why spend the time and the resources to find out if a patient has this condition to just tell them, well, you have it, good day. But the patients want to know that the quality of life and mental toll this takes on them not knowing and seeing specialists and buying products that don't work and all of this is a lot. And I think that's not fully captured in the clinician's response when they say why diagnose. And I know this does come down to at the end of the day to insurance reimbursements and fiscal considerations, but the patients want to know. So that's been the biggest driver for us.
So do you see the patient being an influencer then to help you move this along?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, self-advocacy. Yeah.
Alrighty, well, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful round of questions, and thank you also, Kristy, for telling us more about your story and Neuright. We're really excited about the product and the potential it has to impact patient care. So with that, I think we'll wrap for the day, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.